That got a clap. I love it. So in fall 2018, the Du Bois Graduate Society put on a one-day symposium called We, the People of Color. And what we attempted to do with that symposium is to interrogate what does it mean for students and scholars of color to deal with this tension of scholar and activist, scholar and activist. And if you weren't there, I'll give you the headline. It's a false dichotomy. Our work as scholars is activism. We work to dismantle systems of oppression, racism, sexism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, even capitalism. To ask questions that have never been asked before is a disruptive thing. To sit and be in spaces that were not made or codified for us is disruptive. Right? So why do I talk about this idea of a false dichotomy? Because you may be wondering, why is the W.E.B. Du Bois Graduate Society entangled with the Harvard Graduate Student Union? You might wonder, how does this institution that's been around for about 35 years, named after the first African-American and person of color to get a PhD from Harvard, how does it get wrapped up in this activism work, right? Because the stereotype is that the work that happens on the ground, the organizing, the agitating, the advocating, in some type of way that's in tension with institutional organizations like the Graduate Student Society. But we know that the struggle is collective. We know that the work that we do as a W.E.B. Du Bois Graduate Society, holding space for decades for individuals of color, for minorities, for underrepresented groups, space that is social, that is intellectual, and also political. That is our work. And we stand in solidarity and partnership with the union because we know that our work is to fight so that all students have the rights, the resources, and even the recourse to successfully navigate this space. So we thank you for being here. Please. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being our partner in this work. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ege. I'm a student worker in the philosophy department. I'm an organizer with the Harvard Grad Students Union and a bargaining committee member. And so today's our day. Today's our first union birthday. And it's an important day because we're still fighting for fair wages, adequate health care, protections from harassment and discrimination. And so far, the administration has given us none of that. When we sat at the bargaining table, we said, a year is enough. We want to negotiate a strong contract in a year. Let's meet and get this done. It's a year out, and we can't wait any longer. So we're here today to have this conversation about these issues that we care so much about, and we're gonna keep returning here. We were here, hundreds of us were here during the day in solidarity, and this is not gonna stop here. So yeah, with that, I'll start by telling you a little bit about tonight's event. I would like to thank the GSAS Student Engagement Fund and the Warren Center for making this happen. I would like to thank Tracy and Laura from the Common Spaces. They've given us the space, they've set it up for us. We're really thankful to them for inviting us to the Commons where we all belong. And they run a Crossroads series, so student organizations can put up these events, so bear that in mind if you have an organization and if you would like to use this space. It's here for us. So that's everything for the technical things. I'd like to start introducing our panelists. So Abby Schiff is a fifth-year PhD student in immunology. She's an MD PhD candidate. She's originally from Brookline, Massachusetts, and she attended Harvard College and currently works on the cellular mechanisms of HIV-induced susceptibility to tuberculosis. Abby's here as a union organizer. She's done fantastic work for our union, and I'm sure a lot of you already know her. So thank you, Abby, for being here.
Next, we want to introduce Gregory Davis. So Gregory is a fifth-year PhD student in African American Studies and Psychology. He is a Morehouse man, originally from Detroit, and he also has his law degree from UCLA.
Luis Arnias is a filmmaker from Venezuela who currently lives and works in Boston, Massachusetts. In 2009, he completed the diploma program at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and he's a recipient of Mass Cultural Council grant for film and video in 2013 and a Film Study Center fellow at Harvard from 2014 to 2017. Thank you, Luis.
Speaking of false dichotomies and rejecting boxes, Boots Riley. Poet, rapper, vocalist, director, producer, songwriter, community organizer. Boots Riley is a writer and director of Sorry to Bother You. Yeah. Sorry to Bother You was introduced to critically acclaim in 2018 at the Sundance Film Festival. In addition to that, Boots is also the lead vocalist for the Coop. Talk about doing the work. Boots was deeply involved in the Occupy Oakland movement. He is also the author of the best-selling book, Tell Homeland Security, We Are the Bomb. Without further ado, please welcome Boots Riley.
We're really lucky to have you here with us today. And for those of you who've seen the movie, you're really lucky to have gotten to check it out. But for those who haven't yet, I highly recommend it. But I just wanted to start off with a little bit more information about how you got involved in activism and labor, and how your personal story brought you to making this movie.
Yeah. Well, when I was 14 years old, a youth organizer showed up at my house with a van full of 14-year-old girls and said, we're going to go to the beach, but first we're going to go support the Watsonville cannery workers strike. Do you want to go?
That's great.
And so I got in the van. But you know, what was that, and that led to supporting the Watsonville cannery workers strike, and then getting involved in summer projects, which were helping to organize farm workers, helping to organize a new farm workers union in the Central California Valley, which were made up of folks who broke off from the UFW because the UFW was helping the immigration authorities to deport undocumented workers and not organizing them. So this group of folks broke off and created what they called the Anti-Racist Farm Workers Union, and had a call out. And so, I got real, and they were radical, the folks that were organizing this. They weren't just organizing a union, but they looked at it, because they actually were students who had been involved in the student movement that that ended up with the 1968 massacre of students in Mexico City. And those folks, a group of those folks said, we got to get out of here, but we also want to keep the revolution going. So they went and tried to join Chavez, and then decided that wasn't doing what they needed to do and broke off and did this. So there was a radical politic, and this group was also connected to an organization called Progressive Labor Party. And so at the age of 15, I joined Progressive Labor Party and got involved in struggles at school that then kind of pushed me into a position of having to then, after I was put forward as this leader of this school thing, to having to then look up and start reading, trying to figure out what I'm talking about. And and at that same time, working in the Central California Valley, it was good for me because in Oakland, there was no way, as just a high school student, that you were going to catch me like passing out flyers or, like Progressive Labor Party. A lot of the folks in the Bay Area were, older white dudes. And by older, I meant 28, 30, and I wasn't going to be like standing on a corner selling a paper with there was, in high school, that just wasn't going to work. But being able to go someplace else and help people with the struggle that they were doing kind of allowed me to, take a step back and see how, and see where power comes from, how the system works, and how people can organize their community. So then I took that back to Oakland and was then able to see myself as an organizer. But in that time, we heard a lot about Teatro Campesino, which was a theater group that was around the UFW Chavez days in the 60s and early 70s, using theater right there in the fields as people were struggling around wages. And so I always knew about that. And my grandmother had ran the Oakland Ensemble Theater in the 70s and 80s. And I was involved in the Black Repertory Theater, which was just a little storefront theater, and plays at school. So I kind of took to that idea of making theater that could expand things. And but then Spike Lee came out, and I was like, wow, okay, you can do this theater thing in a much bigger way. And so I went to film school at San Francisco State. But I was also doing music at the same time, at a time when every record label had to have one group from Oakland. So we happened to be that group. And I got a record deal while I was in school. So I think I'm a junior because I didn't finish school. So and did music for 20-something years. But during that time, some of our most popular songs were 8-minute long songs that I kind of made because I really wanted to be making movies. And then we also had songs that would be 3 and 4 songs tied together into a longer story that also then had a little like quote unquote skit, which was more like a radio play. And so we'd be doing that whole time. So that then brought me around to a hotel room at some time in 2011 when I was like, okay, I'm bored and I'm tired. I need to do this movie and write a movie like I've been saying I was going to do. So,
great. Yeah. Can I ask a follow-up? So you mentioned the van full of 14-year-old girls. How important is it to get people involved in activism young? Do you think if you would have been, invited to activism when you were 20 or 25, that you would have had a different trajectory?
I think it just really, it depends. At that time, it served something, because besides them being girls, once I got in there, here was a group of people my own age that actually watched the news and could put things in context and talked about things in the way that that showed they cared about it. And I hadn't been around that before, and that certainly wasn't me at the time. And so, and I was like, wow, I want to understand what's happening in the world. I want to feel like I'm engaged with the world, and that was something that was very important to me at the time. I'm sure if I hadn't found that by the time I was 25, it still would be very important. But you know, I think what we're doing is about people working together and people being in the same spaces together. So there's a heavy social aspect to everything we do. It's not just, you know, some, you know, lofty idea that, you know, people should get part of the wealth that they create. But it's about people. So I don't discount that idea that I got in there because there was a bunch of girls. I mean, that's, you know, they happen to be girls, but at that time that was just a social scene. Yeah. And I think that's what happens is you get involved and interested in being engaged in life. And so that, you know, I think that could happen at any age. There's no way to know for sure, but yeah.
And just to follow up on that, I think it's interesting that you guys were going to another event, and I think when we're doing organizing with the union, often we go talk to people about what issues they're having in their own life, you know, whether it's something about compensation or being able to afford rent or childcare or healthcare, other things like that. And that's sort of a more personal story, and you know, most people have something that could be better about their life as a graduate worker. But there's also a big component of solidarity in what we do. So there's, you know, even if things may be okay for, you know, me, maybe they're not so great for somebody else. So it seems like when you were starting out, it was sort of more about solidarity, and then also maybe you learned about other things. How do you see that balance of sort of learning about how to do something about your own situation versus working with other people about what might be priorities for them?
Well, yeah, I think there obviously has to be a balance because sometimes you need that solidarity work to kind of to see what other folks are doing and how you can apply that to the work that you're doing. The danger is sometimes we get so much involved in the solidarity aspect that we don't have anything to bring to the other groups that we're supposedly in solidarity with. We don't have our own base of power that with which we can express a real solidarity. Right. And then we also don't have anything that we can take their lessons from. Things that I've seen it happen, like, so I'm pretty sure this is true all around, but like in the Bay Area, the nurses union is always like the most hyped and militant, one of the most hyped and militant groups of folks that come to an event. And I've seen several situations where there have been people trying to get their workplace inspired, but through meeting these other folks who are at their job and doing an action, it speaks to them and they get radicalized. So I think it's important but it works best when you have your own way of expressing that. And when that solidarity, and hopefully a higher level of that, is that solidarity being able to be expressed in a way that actually affects, in a direct way, affects that other struggle. So, for instance, in the US, solidarity strikes are illegal because they work. You know, so like if you had a strike at Burger King and then the trucking company went on strike to that was bringing, you know, the food there, you know, that would be technically illegal. But that's the kind of thing that we need to do. We need to break those laws because they work, you know.
So leading into that, one of the great things about Sorry to Bother You is that it really models the process of organizing in a workplace. So you go from having a conversation at the coffee machine to having information outside of the workplace to really understanding what the goals are and then eventually having a strike. And I think that, you know, those personal relationships starting out early on are really critical to actually be successful in a strike and actually changing conditions in a workplace. So can you tell me a little bit more about how organizing happens in a workplace, and how did you decide to portray that in the movie, and how did you hope to, you know, inspire other people about organizing?
Well, to be clear, I've never organized a work site myself, but I've worked with many people who have, and the radical organizations that I've been involved with, we kind of used a lot of those same ideas and strategies. Which part of it is that you aren't powerful just because you're able to say something and because you have an opinion and you're able to articulate it well. That's important. But the question is, who is your base? Who are your people? Who do you know? Who do you have relationships with? Are you struggling with those folks? Are you talking to them and moving them somewhere? Often, definitely with folks that consider themselves radical, that whole aspect is left out. You find people that already agree with you, and then you go hang out with them, right? And that is not how we're gonna build something. The idea is, has to do with like making, being a person in the world and being being a version of what you think people should be, which is, it has to do with communicating with other people, being there for folks that even, not just around the campaign that you're dealing with, but just being a good friend, and then also struggling around the things that need to be struggled with. And those things end up being really theoretical when there is no campaign. But the thing about, organizing a union is there is a campaign. And so it's around, you have a base of folks that you are trying to get to be involved in things and take things to the next level. And partly because of this lofty idea, but partly because they are your friends and you want them to be more empowered. So that's part of, what Squeeze was doing. And definitely there are people that do it more mechanically than others, and there's a critique of that somewhat in the movie. But yeah, it's all about meeting people and getting them to understand where their power comes from. Yeah.
So just as a quick personal story, so I'm a graduate student a graduate worker in immunology, and a couple of years ago, Ben Kane, one of the UAW organizers, got in touch with me, and he had been involved as a postdoc in another workers' union, and talked to me about his own experience of realizing that the work that he was doing in the lab was not just, his own thing working on his own project, but was also labor. And I think that, it changed the way that I was thinking about my own academic work, because, my work goes towards grants for my advisor, for the university. My publications and other graduate workers' publications are the engine that fuels scholarship here at Harvard. And so the work that we do should really be valuable. I mean, if we didn't do any graduate student or undergraduate work, whether it's research or teaching, this university would not function. And so I think that getting to realize that, the work that I was doing was not just this one isolated thing, but was connected to everybody else, like all of you guys out here, really transformed the way I thought about my connection to labor. So I had grown up in a sort of, lefty household and had heard about strikes and gone to a summer camp where we went to strikes as an activity, and that was great. But I think that I kind of thought of it as something that didn't relate to me as much, but it really does relate to me, and it does relate to us. So I just want to share that. But it's also important it was important for me not to feel so isolated and siloed, and realize that the struggles that I was having and still have are things that many other people also go through. And I just want to share that, in the movie, when Squeeze is talking to Cash, or, when they're talking about this stuff, these individual struggles are not isolated, and there actually is power when people can come together and change the institutions. So anyway, that's my story. But I hope that you guys will, get involved and stay involved.
I would also, I'd add to that is that, often what gets brought up as an argument against labor organizing in general in the U.S. is people like, well, we don't really have the same kind of production that we used to have. That's somewhere else, and we don't make the widgets or whatever. But the thing is whatever job you have, you only have it because you are creating way more profit with your labor than what you're getting paid. That's just how capitalism works. So the point is that the wealth that's getting created here has to do with the people that are working and making that happen. And so in any situation like that, one, there is leverage, and that's where the power is with the ability to say, you know what, maybe we're not going to do this. And then all of a sudden, people are like, well, wait. So, because in the just always bringing it to, you can make less money or you can make no money, right? And even though the idea is that this is an institution of higher learning, we all know there's a lot of bullshit to that, right? It is higher, There is learning going on, but there's also a lot of money that has to do with it. And it's also helping create products that help other companies make more money, right? So, it's really time for everyone to see that, because not only is it about wages, because that's what the struggle starts out as, but think about just how this institution, learning works, like science. We were talking about that earlier. Like, a lot of people that get involved in science is probably for some lofty reasons. Like, I want to help with this thing. I want to stop climate change. I want to, help people not be as sick as they are. But you get in there and you realize that it's whoever has the money is deciding what that whole lab is working on, right? And what would it be like if all of these folks that came in there with these lofty ideas had a say in what was being studied, right? Had a say, were able to say, you know what? No, we've got these group of people that will stop working if we decide to. And so this is what we've decided we should be, be gearing our studies to. Now, that's scary to some people because it's obviously there's some weight put to the folks that run the institution, right? And, some of that is earned and some of that is not. But the point is that we could have a society in which the people that are making that are creating the wealth, creating the product, can have a say over what's done with that, and over what they're actually creating, and where those resources and where that wealth goes. And so not just here at Harvard, but in other places. And so I think that's also maybe one of the reasons that they're so eager to break this movement you have, is because it will reverberate to other folks as well.
Boots, may I ask, how do you get people to see that? So my little story is, I'm part of the Du Bois Society. It's our graduate society for students of color. One year we had the incoming students come, and there was this guy. He was, Latino, white. His name was Leroy. And I was like, Leroy, look, we need a union. Our work creates value. We are going to go out and we're going to, have a contract and affect change. And he was in, one of the departments here that pays a little extra, that has a little more cushion. You can get travel grants. You can go out there. And to him, there was no need for a union because he had it good. He thought things were great. And first of all, his name was Leroy, so I was just like, you should get this, like. But then also I was like, what can I say to you? You're not even a grad student yet. Like, how can I show you that, like, what we do is real and creates real value, and we deserve to share in that?
Well, I mean, the answer to a lot of these things is, the first part is I don't know. But the second part is that some people, it will take them seeing that qualitative change happening before they come along with the tide, right? So, for some folks. But even for them, one part of the way is you keep struggling with them, and they're gonna feel alone at some point. They're gonna feel like, I wish I had some base of power, even when they feel like they've made it. They're good. That's the thing that groupings like this offer is, protection and a team, right? And at different points, people find that. But it's true. There's a few people that can make it, right? That's what they got us fighting for, is to be the one at the top of the pyramid, or to be the crab that gets out of the bucket. And the thing is like, yeah, there will be a crab that figures out how to get out of the bucket. And and you start talking about in these lofty ideas, I think, for a lot of our parents and for us as parents, we know the realities of how the world works, and we still, like, it's our job, like, to show people, oh, if you're trying to get out of the bucket, you're a crab, there's one way you could get out, right? You're gonna do that for your kids. But as as someone who is not just talking about organizing for one person, we realize that we have to turn the bucket over, right? So everybody can get out, and that's where it doesn't come as a personal level, because he's gonna need somebody at some point. He's gonna, he's not gonna get out squeaky clean, But the point is, we can't control when that is, and at the same time, some of people's hesitations have to do with whether they think it can work or not, whether they think anything will happen. Is it a worthwhile risk? Yeah. And so they come along once they see things building, right?
Hi.
Hey. Go ahead.
So let's talk a little bit more about cinema. The Good to Me feels to me your band that is a collaborative effort in terms of you guys share the creative labor. Narrative filmmaking is kind of the opposite to me in terms of process. It's very hierarchical. Can you tell me
what?
Hierarchical. In
Okay.
terms to, I would like to ask you a question. It's like, how was the transition for you to be a musician and then to be a director in a set?
Yeah, I mean, I've never, the coup has never, like, ran as a collective or anything like that. It's always been like, how do I get this out there? How do I use it? Like, we came out on, our first album came out on EMI Records, which is not around anymore, but it's basically like Warner Brothers and Interscope put together or something like that, like a big label that had money in it. So I've always just focused on, how do I get this art out there and what will it do for the listener? I haven't ever been like, I've decided that my goal is not to create some new business model under capitalism, right? Because that's just not, I've seen that happen before, like, oh, we're gonna make this collective and it's gonna be, it's gonna show people how the world could be. And you spend your life making that thing, and it's could be an anarchist space, or it could be a bakery or something like that. But I feel like what we need is people organizing where they are in other spaces. So it's always been for me about how to get that music out there. And artistically, it's always been, here's my vision. Can you help me make my vision come together? And I've also sometimes a lot of different musicians that I work with, they have their own vision, they have their own thing, and I help them make theirs too. But so with the making a film, it was very much the same. It was really analogous to how I make movies, because like I said, when I go into a studio, I may be there with someone considered one of the best bass players in the world, and the drummer who considers himself the best drummer in the world, and the guitar player who has ADD and is always texting all caps or whatever. And they're all masters. They're all the experts at what they do, and they know way more about music than I do. But it's my vision, and so my job is to get them to help me make that vision happen. And I can't do that just by being like, I'm paying you to do this, boom, do this, or whatever. Because it's gonna come out mechanical. It's not gonna come out, like that doesn't work. What I have to do is know how to communicate my vision in a way that adjusts for them and understands what they bring to the world with what they do, and gets them to see it and to really buy into it. So once they're doing that, and that takes me knowing them, that takes me understanding, how to communicate with them in particular. And this is all with me knowing they know way more about music than I do. But I also know that even though the guitar player is the expert at playing guitar, he's also going to want a guitar solo on every song, even if that makes it worse. And so I have to know that, my opinion is no guitar solo. And that's fine, even though you're the expert at guitar, right? But I also have to know when the bass player has a way better bass line than what I came up with, and I have to tie my ego to the finished product, which is the song, and as opposed to, controlling every aspect. Yes, I have to be okay with it, but I have to be okay with people putting in what they have to put in, and that's the same way with directing the film. Like I wrote the script, and then an actor might be like, this doesn't make sense for me to stand up right here, right? And there are some directors that'll be like, well, script says you're standing up right here. But for me, I'm really working with those actors to make the character more real, right?
Yeah,
So,
sure.
with the cinematographer who I might have had a certain idea about how the camera should move, and he convinces me that that's corny or whatever, or something like that. But it's all that same sort of thing. And yeah, there's somewhat of a hierarchical relationship that exists in there, because somebody's guiding the ship, and I'm sure, like, even in collectives, there's somebody who's in charge of the kitchen today, right? There's somebody who's in charge of the putting stuff out in the front, right? Somebody has to there's someone that's in charge, but it's collectively decided. In this case, it's not collectively decided except through that, except through the process that it took to get there, but yeah.
True. Your film was selected to be part of the Sundance Lab. I was staged, Sorry to Bother You was when I got selected into the Sundance Lab, and how did it shape the outcome of the film?
Okay. So I wrote the movie, started writing in 2011, maybe got to the end of it the first time at the beginning of 2012. And I say that because I kept the document open and was always changing and working on it. But then we made an album. Made an album in 2012 that was supposed to be the soundtrack, and so that I could get publicity around it and get the movie funded. And that didn't work. And so we toured. And in 2014, I ran into Dave Eggers on the street, and who has this publishing company called McSweeney's. And I asked him if he'd read it and give me notes, and he asked to put it out on McSweeney's. So we put it out as its own paperback book on McSweeney's in 2014 and packaged it with the McSweeney's Quarterly. Went out to like 10 or 20,000 people. And then that kind of got more wind in my sails, and I joined SF Film as a filmmaker in residence in and there I met a couple producers who had also gotten other films into Sundance, their films, and maybe partly because of those producers, I was selected for a grant from SF Film, which allowed me to not tour, because most of my life has been like with my music collecting pennies, and so you have to collect a lot of them, and so you're on tour all the time, and so to work on the thing, I got a grant so that I didn't have to go out on tour for a little bit, and then that maybe, it's hard to know why, but all of that built up, and I got into the Sundance Labs that year in 2015, Sundance Writers Lab. And then 2016 got into the Directors Lab, and in 2017 we shot it.
Amazing.
So, yeah. So, yeah, and it's all, it's kind of like stone soup. Like, this person's down, that person's down. And a lot of what, kind of got it going was I had done the Writers Lab, and then a friend of mine named Moshe Kasher, was this comedian. Well, somebody went to his wedding, and then they called me, and they said, hey, man, I was just at Moshe's wedding this weekend, and Jordan Peele was there. And so then I called up Moshe. I was like, hey, Moshe, congratulations. I heard Jordan Peele was at your wedding. And so I said, look, I'm going to send you this, and only if you like it, send it to Jordan. Sent it to Jordan. A few days later, Jordan Peele hit me back and said, I want to play the lead in this. And so he was the first one kind of affiliated with that is playing Cassius. And then he directed Get Out. And he was like, I don't want to act anymore. and so, there had already been a certain amount of buzz, so I was like, and we had started getting investors interested, and so I was like, oh, okay, this is just going to kill the project. But he was like, look, I'll help you get whoever you want to get. And so I was like, okay, Donald Glover. And Donald Glover, he had actually read it in 2014, but with Jordan giving it to him, he was like, yeah, I want to play Cassius. And he was like, but I might get this Star Wars thing. And then, so he got the call that he got the Star Wars thing, and then called me and said, well, can you wait till after we film Star Wars and after we film Atlanta Season 2? And I was like, yeah, we might not have the money, who knows what'll happen, the investors will run away. And 10 minutes after I hung up the phone with him, Lakeith's manager called me out of the blue. I don't know how he got my number. He was like, "You need to meet with Lakeith Stanfield. You need to meet with Lakeith." And yeah, and so he must have been standing in the room where Donald was talking to me. And so then that's how that happened. Yeah. And so we were able to keep the buzz that happened from having these, because at the time, Lakeith there'd only been a couple episodes of Atlanta that had come out by then. And so we were able to keep the buzz that kind of had happened from that and that made investors be like, "Oh, this must be about something."
Yeah, it's a long process, right? Like it took at least 6 or 7 years, and then gather in station in order to just propel it. It's just such a crazy work.
Sorry, shit. Go, keep talking.
Oh, you want this one?
Yeah. Keep talking.
So this is my last questions, and then the trajectory of the film, it starts actually following the life of Cassius Green, Cash. When he goes to pay for gas, it's like a hilarious moments, right? He says 42, and he puts 42 cents, and then it's like such a great laugh, right? Then he starts working in telemarketing, and the comedy is still palpable and is still very present. Then he becomes a power caller and goes to this party in which he's actually forced to rap for the audience. And then he's still rapping comedy, but it's a really thin veil, and I can still almost cackle at it. But then next to you, though, is a huge turn in which when he becomes actually a Equestrian. And he's already, laughing anymore. It just becomes that this reality is the reality that he's going to be living in from now on. And I'm really curious as how you see the relationship between comedy and violence.
Between comedy and violence?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would say this, that violence is like the head of a contradiction happening, right? The culmination of a contradiction that comes in, and so much of, if someone were to stand up here and give a lecture on what capitalism is, they'd say, pay attention to this contradiction and this contradiction. And that's analysis, right? Which is saying these other contradictions aren't as important because they're affected more by these other bigger contradictions. And what they're doing is that's exaggerating a contradiction in order to show how it works, And that exaggeration of contradiction is exactly what is what irony is, right? That focus on the contradiction. And it's also the motor for both tragedy and comedy, right? Which is this exaggeration of contradiction. And, actually in my film, a lot of people will say it's surreal because and I think that's because it's exaggerating contradictions that don't usually get exaggerated. But all movies are exaggerating contradictions. We're just used to the particular contradictions that they're exaggerating. Like, that's like how you build tension is exaggerating this versus exaggerating that. That's how you show the conflict in heist film is exaggerating this one contradiction. But we're so used to seeing certain things that we don't notice. We think of these particular ways of storytelling as just the way life is. Matter of fact, we start telling our own stories of our own lives based on these patterns of exaggerating particular contradictions in these stories. And so when you choose different contradictions to exaggerate, partially in my case because I have a different view of the world maybe than some of the other storytellers, then that feels surreal, right? And so, you know, though I think it's comedy and tragedy, which I think violence is part of that, you know, is part of both. You know, they're all related to showing where the contradiction is.
On that note, just thinking about the film, so the advertising campaign kind of made it seem like it was going to be, you know, one thing, you know, a movie about code switching, a movie about, you know, someone trying to discover their real voice. You know, I was flipping through Hulu, I saw the movie, I was like, oh yeah, I meant to catch this. Let me watch it real quick. Start watching it. 45 minutes into the movie, I'm on, you know, texting everybody I know, what the fuck is happening in this movie? And one of the things about the movie that's so amazing and so, like, what the hell is going on is the imagery, the kind of shockingness of the imagery. There's, you know, scenes of violence, there's scenes of, you know, the things we'd never seen before, never thought we would see. Was it important for you to have such, you know, like, to have your audience come in cold, to have your audience, like, not know what they were going to see when they saw the movie?
Yeah, I mean, I tried to get it to be where the trailer was just the cast sitting in chairs telling people, really go see this movie. Yeah, I thought that the trailers revealed too much. So, I mean, and there's, you know, the way people see movies, they want to know what something is about a little bit more. So, you know, we had to give in there. But yeah, I wanted people to not just empathize with what Cassius was going through, but to go through it with him. And so that was a lot of the visual motif was he's not just gonna say that he feels like he's intruding on people's lives, you know, and then we know that, and he makes a face that makes us feel that he feels that, and so you know, we're gonna feel him intruding on people's lives. And, you know, if he's discovering something about what he thinks about identity in relationship to his voice, how do I talk about what that is and what that feels like? And for me, that was like, one way to do that is just to have it overdubbed, and so that it feels like it's not coming from him. So all of those things, you know, it was about like making people feel like you feel when you come upon new ideas that change your view of the world. Yeah. So I wanted people to have.
So in thinking about that, I mean, some people think, you know, the truth will set us free. That when people see the shocking reality of life, that's what's going to change them. That's what's going to get them on board with things like collective action. One of the things that happens in your movie is that, you know, the world is brought to light as to what Armie Hammer and his company is doing, and you think like, oh, this is going to take them all down, and it doesn't. What to you is the kind of, what was kind of motivation there? Like, why does the kind of truth of everything end up in a way that, you know, that Cash doesn't expect? Why does it make Armie Hammer richer for people to know what he's doing, you know, behind closed doors?
Well, I mean, I think because that's kind of how it works, right? Is that if people don't know how to change, if we're just talking about, and artists and academics all do this all the time, which is, here's what's wrong, the end, right? And then you get awards and all that. But the thing is and then we're like, well, why doesn't nobody cares about anything? But you know, like, what's wrong with these, you know, the dumb proletariat, they just, you know, they don't care. And the truth is just that, you know, art, academia, the left in general, has gone so far away from class struggle that when we for the last 50 years, that when we present a problem, we're just, you know, basically making new paintings on the wall in the prison, right? But when people see that they can do something about it, then they can use that information, and it also affects the way that we expose what's going on. You know, it affects the angle at which we look at the problems. So I think that one time, so we in the 90s, I had a 24-year-old midlife crisis, and I was stopped.
That's real. That's real.
Stopped doing music after our second album, and me and some friends created an organization called the Young Comrades. So I just want to say that, so when I say this next part, people don't get confused that don't know about this. But what we named ourselves after was this South African organization called the Young Comrades. And I had seen, and I didn't know much about them, but I had seen a documentary in the 80s, and it was a PBS documentary, and it was an interview with the Young Comrades. The Young Comrades were all of these youth who had gone on strike from school in Soweto, and they were still young in the early 80s. And, you know, there's controversy around them. They were known for necklacing people, the young, just to be clear, young black South Africans who would necklace cops, meaning put a tire around them and set them on fire. But they were also involved in heavy organizing of the whole towns and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, there's an interview with an 11-year-old kid, and it was around the same time as, you know, I got in the van and I saw this documentary. It's an 11-year-old kid who's talking about Reagan, talking about different trade policies all around the world, things like that, and wasn't going to school, right? And the thing is that they were involved in a movement that was involved in taking power over their area and over their lives. So the information meant more to them, and they took this information in because they were trying to figure out how to do something about it, and they were involved in an active struggle that was united with different strikes and work stoppages and other sorts of actions that were happening. And so if there is a movement that's based around what the main contradiction under capitalism is, which is the exploitation of labor, then we have something where people understand, like even just the average everyday person, no matter what their supposed political background is, they understand the people with the money have the power, right? They could be a Republican. They understand that. They're not going to say, no, the people with the money, they don't have the power. They're never going to say that. But if they're very right-wing, they might say the people with the money should have the power or whatever. But everyone knows that. Everyone agrees with that. The question is where do they get this wealth, right? So if we can explain that to folks, at least just even on a general, where do they get this wealth? They get the wealth from the labor, the work that people do every day on the job. How do people get power? Is by being able to withhold that labor and have something to say over it. And because the left has been running away from just explaining that simple thing for 50 years, we've gone into all sorts of other explanations of how power works that simply denies the fact that the power lies in figuring out where the power point is in our economic system, and that's at the ability to organize and withhold labor as a collective. And so the left has gotten away from that, and we've suffered because of it. Yeah. And so I'm trying to remember what. Oh yeah. So, but because we've gotten away from it, even radical, progressive, and liberal movements have all been about spectacle since the new left of the 60s. So that artists could be like, well, if it's just going to be 10,000 people on the street showing how mad we are, showing that we disagree with this, I might as well make my painting. I might as well make my song. I might as well just make this movie, because it's all been, or I might as well spend 10 years writing this book that 12 people will read, right? Because it's all just spectacle. It's all just exposing something. And the left hasn't always been this way. In the 20s and 30s, and I'm gonna really essentialize here, but I don't go to Harvard, so fuck it. But in the 20s and 30s, there's a documentary called Seeing Red that said over the 20s and 30s, there was 1 million card-carrying communists in the United States. At a time when there was only a population of 120 million people, right? And so from that, you could imagine what, kind of, who else was around, that million card-carrying folks. And at that time, one of the reasons they had so many people and so many people behind their movements is that in places like Montana, Utah, Alabama, those were places that the FBI thought of as hotbeds of communist activity, because there were all these strikes going on with miners and they were militant strikes, some with gunplay, right? That were led by radicals who were open with their vision of trying to create a revolutionary movement. There were these strikes happening. That was at the same time, and that during that time, Rockefeller sent out Pinkerton Security and mowed down like 100 or 200 strikers in Colorado or whatever. So the times were heightened there. In the Midwest around those same times, you had places like all through the Midwest where people were occupying factories. You had on the West Coast, the longshoremen, who were thought of as the most unorganizable group of folks because their skill level was supposedly less than custodians, and they were in places that were, unconnected, and there was high turnover. They had a militant strike that led to one of still the most militant unions ever, but they were met with tanks. And of course, there were revolutions going on around the world. And unconnected, but kind of adding to the milieu, just around that time, there had been the Bonus March, which was World War I veterans who had marched, some of them with guns, on the White House so that they could get their bonus checks that they were owed for World War I. There was a heightened time here, and there were outward revolutionary movements happening, and many of them were tied to labor strike, openly tied to labor strikes. So in that milieu is where we got the New Deal. It didn't come because the left decided we're going to focus all our energy on getting FDR elected. They knew that if they could shut down industries, they could make any politician do what they wanted them to do, right? So the biggest, arguably that and the Civil Rights Bill are two of the biggest legislative wins that liberal politics can claim, right? And they came because they were scared of a possible revolutionary movement happening then, and then other movement happening in the 60s. Now, because communists around the world were trying to get the U.S. to get in the war to fight fascism, there was what was called the United Front Against Fascism. And the way that took place in the U.S. was that there was a promise that if the U.S. went to Europe to fight fascism, that people wouldn't be organizing for a revolution here, right? That was the idea with the biggest radical organization in the United States, which was the Communist Party at the time. And part of that there are other reasons for this too, but that was one of the biggest reasons. Part of that meant people going underground. So all of a sudden, these radicals who were now progressive, quote unquote. They were still, many of them were still involved in the Communist Party, but they weren't being outward with their politic of saying, we need to tear this system down and create a new one. That was part of the United Front Against Fascism, which made it very easy for the McCarthy era to point at folks and be like, look at these folks. They've been lying to you. They're really radicals. They're really communists. And they had been lying. That was, but if they had been like 15 years before, 12 years before, then they would have pointed at people and they'd be like, I know, they just helped me move my furniture back in while the police were moving it out, you know? And they said that this was for the revolution, you know? But, you know, so it was so that retreat made McCarthyism really able to happen. And so that, in combination, McCarthy era House Un-American Activities Committee, wrapped with revelations about what happened under Stalin, made the biggest radical organization in the United States break into all these little groups in the 50s, which then in the 60s, those groups became the beginning of the New Left. And the New Left did things much differently. They said, fuck you, we're revolutionaries, because they didn't want to hide it anymore. Fuck you, we're radicals, whatever, which was good. But they also decided to start focusing on students and on cities. And people moved away from those areas that I mentioned from the 20s and 30s, which are now red states, but were back then red states. And so for the first time in the 60s, you started hearing the phrase, the students are the revolution, which was not historically accurate. It just wasn't true, except for contemporarily, you could say the Cultural Revolution at the time was led by students. A lot of it was led by students. But it wasn't historically accurate that the students were the revolution. So now you started moving people away from actually organizing the working class and organizing in the workplace. And so what do you have? What can you do? I mean, here you guys are actually workers, so you can have a strike. But for undergrads, a lot of that is we got a lot of people together and we're showing that we are not for this or whatever. And so that changed all of a sudden, and those became demonstrations. And, you know, what is the word demonstration? We were like, what are we demonstrating, right? It used to be that we're demonstrating these 10 or 20,000 people will shut down your industry. We're demonstrating power. Now we've disconnected all of that from actually where our base of power is. So, and in doing that, even us as, and I'm including me, because I've definitely been involved in stuff like that, where we have, 20 to 50,000 people show up, and a lot of the new people are like, okay, what do we do now? And we're like, we don't know, lift your voice, And what we're doing is we're selling a false idea of how power works when we don't tie it to the actual ability to shut down industry, to withhold labor and stop profit. We start selling a different idea of how power, so we end up selling this idea that capitalism is democratic, that if enough people raise their voice and say they're against something, the powers that be, they're fair. They're going to do what the people want to do. That's basically what we're saying. So that's why, millions of people gathered on the street against the invasion of Iraq in the early 2000s. I think the war happened, but there might have been a different outcome had there been a very organized working class that was able to actually shut down profit and then have a say in what was happening. Similarly these days, if when Ferguson happened, if there had already been 20 years of organizing around labor, and you had even a partial general strike or a fifth of St. Louis shut down, you would have had that cop indicted within a couple days. And that's because that's where power is. And there's very few people that could argue. Well, we can argue about how attainable is that sort of a situation and how do we get there. But we know that that's where we have to get at some point, at some point in a movement in which the people are able to have power.
I really appreciate that answer because you just demonstrated in that story about the 11-year-old boy in South Africa, it's not about knowing the truth. It's about internalizing the truth and acting on it. And you're saying that we've gotten away from that. We just want to see the truth. We just want to see the spectacle. I really appreciate that. Now, my last question before we go out to the audience is about like race and class. So, 2016, last 50 years, last 100 years, we've been having this conversation about are race struggles about class? Are class struggles about race? I think one of the things about your movie, your film, at least the way I watched it, I saw in Cassius' story an essentially black story, but it was also an essentially class story. And the impression I got was that it's not race over class or class over race, but it's that race in class and class in race. How do you see that vision and that interaction between race and class in your film versus like other interpretations of the labor movement?
Well, I think that race and class are inextricably tied. Yeah. The way that capitalism came to be needed the invention of the idea of race in order to show the white working class that, hey, we're not going to enslave everybody. This other species of beings deserve it, need it, and we're bringing them up. Racism in that form of the idea of race was needed to create capitalism. At the same time as, and so what that means is, one, we are not going to get rid of racism unless we get rid of capitalism, but also, we're not going to build a movement to get rid of capitalism unless we're fighting to get rid of racism at the same time. So, in the movie, there's this idea of whiteness that's investigated, that the white voice, right? And Danny Glover's character explains it as, showing that you don't have a problem, that everything's okay, and says that there's not even, it's a performance that even white people are performing. But I think what that explicitly is a performance of something that's seen as the opposite of the racist tropes of blackness, right? So, and this is where racism still has a utility under capitalism, and how so for instance, you cannot have capitalism without unemployment. It just cannot exist, right? Like if you had zero unemployment, then every worker could demand whatever they wanted and they couldn't be fired, right? So there needs to be an army of unemployed workers in order to threaten those that are working. Now, if you have an army of unemployed workers, you have an army of unemployed people that also need to eat. And so they're going to get involved in whatever will feed them, which is going to be illegal business if they don't have a legal job, obviously. So that illegal business, all business uses violence to regulate itself. Legal business and illegal business use violence, rely on violence to regulate themselves. Like, you can't have the hotel down the street say they're going to build a golf course through this center because somebody from Harvard is going to be like, we've got the paperwork, we have the deed. But that paperwork and deed don't mean shit unless there's somebody with guns that's saying they're going to enforce it. Those are the police. they're there to regulate business, to enforce business regulation. If you go into a store and try to steal some groceries, if you don't get away with it, it's going to be the workers there that stop you, or it's going to be the police. In the 1920s, when liquor was illegal, if you robbed the liquor dude, gangsters come after you. Now you rob the liquor dude, the police come after you. 20 years ago in Oakland, you rob the weed dude, maybe some halfway gangsters might come after you. Right now, you rob the weed dude, police come after you. It's all the same. It's all the same thing. It's just, we call them police and we call the enforcers of illegal business gangsters. It's just the legality of it. Now, here's the thing, is that if you're doing illegal business, you don't have this whole other apparatus. You don't go to a court and say, Your Honor, I was supposed to buy a whole key of cocaine. Clearly, it's half baking soda. I demand restitution. There's no commission to go to and say, no zoning commission and say, we're only zoned for 2 people selling dope on this block. This third person needs that special permit. Can we get that? So those involved in illegal business have to regulate their own business. And that creates all sorts of other situations, creates cultures. As we know, I'm sure many of you are anthropologists and all that kind of stuff. Culture is derived from the way that we survive. That's it. Fishing villages create fishing songs. They're not going to create agricultural songs. You could try to teach a fishing village agricultural songs. They might like the tune, might start humming it, but give them a few years, they're going to change those lyrics to some fishing lyrics because there's a river going right through there. If you want them to sing agricultural songs, move them to where some place that they can plant, and they'll start making their own agricultural songs. But here's the thing. What that means is that capitalism has poverty as a necessity. Mm-hmm. And poverty and crime are a necessity of capitalism. They're just the spill-off, because you can't have full employment under capitalism. And so, but how do you explain that to the whole working class? How do you explain to the working class, look, you're broke because you've made some mistakes. You know, because that's the whole thing, is that they don't want to explain that. They want to say, look, poverty does not come from capitalism. It comes from the mistakes of the impoverished. That's what every cop show tells you. That's what every hard luck story that comes on the news is about, somebody who made it out because they started making the right decisions and they were making the wrong decisions before, because we are taught that poverty comes from the impoverished making bad decisions. And so, but you don't explain that to the whole working class, that, hey, the level of income you're at has to do with the mistakes you've made. You don't do that, because then people start thinking you're full of shit. So what you do is you say, look at these other people. They're savage. Their family structure is messed up, which is bullshit. And they or they're dumb, they're not motivated, this and that. And so you say, look, that is connected to the bad situation that they're in. And that way you use them as the model, so that a white dude making $21,000 a year says, oh, I'm middle class because, I'm not making those bad decisions. I'm just, something's wrong with my bank account this month. But, so the idea, but it teaches them a lesson of who they don't want to be, right? And so these racist ideas have a utility and are kept going because they're what explains capitalism to us. So, where is it going? Oh, yeah, okay. So the move. Okay. So, in order to even, so the struggle in our struggles, when we're talking about why we need to fight this why we need to change things in a certain way, the kinds of campaigns we need to get involved in, will take unwrapping what that is, but in the midst of this struggle as a reason for doing these things. One of the things that I remember from when I did go to the Watsonville Cannery Workers strike at that time, it's in Watsonville, California. It's near the ocean, and there were, at that time, the main workers there were Mexican workers, Filipino workers, and Portuguese workers. And there was a lot of conflict in the groups. And, you know, and I'd been definitely around all the kind of like seeing all the like kind of rainbow coalition stuff, like let's just stop racism, Benetton, that sort of thing, right? Like where like everybody just hang together and that's the end of everything, right? But in this case, this had been something that was going on for years where families were fighting each other. It was definitely around, you know, race. And it was only during the strike when they realized they couldn't strike with one group of them not coming along that really any of the stuff talking about multiracial unity started making any sense, right? Because there was a need for that to happen. There was a need for that struggle. So, you know, sometimes we're talking about trying to stop racism out of the context of what people even care about in their life, right? And I think, you know, putting them together helps, you know, not only is necessary scientifically, but it immediately helps both struggles. I think the question was more, where does the movie sit or something like that?
No, that's perfect. I could listen to you all day, but you know, yeah, that's absolutely what I was trying.
I figure if I talk long enough, I'll hit it.
Oh yeah, no, you got it. We definitely want to give the audience a chance. Okay. I think Aggie has the mic over there.
Well, if any of you have lingering questions, we can move on to the audience whenever. Yeah. Great. So can we have hands up, and Gerald and I are going to bring the mic to you. Yeah. Do you want to start over there, Gerald?
Yeah. Boots, do you want to call out your own questions, or do you want us to call on people?
No, it'd be better if you pick out folks. Before we go into that, I just want to make sure I get said that what y'all are doing is immensely inspiring to me. And as more and more people find out what you're doing, it's going to spread. It's going to, you know, and what you're doing is what you're doing is also teaching, right? I said this to the Oakland teachers who went on strike. Often we're given all this information, but we're not, you know, told like what to do with it. So then you get all this information, you go out into the world, and you are not told how to change it. So you're really just getting trained to live in the world and possibly be one of the crabs that get out. But what you're doing is teaching people what to do with that information and teaching people where their power is at. And that changes the quality of the education just by the strike happening. So I'm not saying the strike happening. I'm assuming that if y'all need to strike, you'll strike. I don't know.
Thanks so much. So my question is about once you have a union at a place like this, how do you sort of allow the educational experience to keep happening? So obviously the material interests of people in this kind of union, unless there's a lot of agitating, they're not necessarily going to be anti-imperialists, or they're not necessarily going to see themselves as having the same material interests as much lower income workers. So how do you kind of maintain the agitation and maintain the militancy to not just unionize here, but then turn that into something much broader?
Well, again, first answer is I don't know, but I think that it just has to do with continued engagement. Like it's, unfortunately, there's always going to be something to struggle around. But separately, there will be other folks that are involved in struggles, and you've got all of you who are now being leaders and taking it to everyone else, and I think that those conversations happen in the context of other campaigns that are happening, and how the union decides to unite with this campaign or that campaign, and even just the talk around that. Should we get involved in that? It ends up making a higher level of political engagement, because now you're not just separate students that are trying to get your degree, but you're connected in a very material way. So those conversations, I think, will be a lot stronger.
Hi, so it appears as though the left has gained some momentum, especially with the White House releasing their so-called report on socialism, which actually made a case for single-payer healthcare, by the way. So what do you think should be done with this momentum to keep the movement going forward?
I was reading your hat, so I didn't get the... Yeah, but what was the first part of your question?
Okay, so I said the left has been gaining some momentum, even to the point where the White House made this so-called report on socialism, which actually makes a case for single-payer healthcare. And I'm asking, what do you think should be done with that momentum that we have? How do we keep it going so that we don't
I think this is part of it. I think that, making it material, making it not just about ideas, making it, these sorts of things not only show something in their victory or whatever, but it raises questions for everyone. I'm sure all of you have been engaged in questions with other folks who either support it or don't support it, but, or even in yourself, like, well, what is this about, and where do we fit in all of this? And so that spreading to, like right now, only, at least a few years ago, it was like only 7% of the workforce was unionized, right? So there's 93% of folks where that can grow, and there can be, we can, and it needs to be with a radical vision. It can't just be the same old labor thing where it's only about this, this pay raise or whatever. It can be connected to power. There's this documentary about a labor union in Sydney, Australia, in the 60s and 70s, and the documentary is called "Breaking the Foundations," and it's about the Building Labor Federation that went from this. They're kind of like a mafia-controlled union in the 50s, and then they got broken free by the organizers, and then they became a militant but not necessarily radical union in the 60s, and meaning like they just shut shit down. They were a building union. They just shut shit down, and they fought fiercely, and they won all their stuff, so they became really powerful. And they were led by some radicals who then decided it was time to start radicalizing their base, and they started connecting with anti-gentrification struggles. So they were in Sydney, and there was an anti-gentrification struggle happening in Melbourne, and it turned out that developer was somebody who was building buildings in Sydney, and they just shut down all of his business, and they were able to do that, and they won that particular struggle. They started getting to a point where they started getting disappeared. Other people started getting disappeared by developers. So that's a different thing. Once you get that powerful, then you gotta, there's other problems. But the point is that I think that struggle around people's material condition and struggle where they can be involved in it is a way for that to happen. There was some other study. One of them was by some folks here at Harvard, and another one was like by some right-wing think tank. And they both kind of said the same thing, that over 50% of millennials said they prefer socialism in the US. So the question is, how do you make something like that real? And it has to do with connecting our social justice movements to struggle. So if we're going to have if we're going to have a Black Lives Matter movement, have that connected to shutting shit down, and and not just being in front of places, because with Occupy Oakland, we did some of that too, where we just kind of block a place. It's way more powerful if people are organizing where they work and can get it to a level where people are engaged enough to shut down their workplaces, and not just symbolically, but strategically at some point, where they can be like, okay, here's where the money comes for this place, so we're shutting this down. I think that's some of the next steps to building a broader radical movement. So.
Hello. Yes, we've had a lot of very interesting, serious, thought-provoking discussions, so hopefully you don't mind that if I'm asking something a lot sillier right now.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, so you used to be very active on Twitter, but then you quit the same night. Then you quit Twitter the same night which you asked what a twink was. So did asking what a twink was lead you to quit Twitter?
Oh, no. I mean, it happened. I quit like hours after I asked that. I was also involved at the same time in some big Twitter argument around Kamala Harris, who is a cop and who. And who actually jailed one of the stars of the new movie Last Black Man in San Francisco, and it turned out that it was that the evidence was forged and witnesses coerced and all that kind of stuff, because they wanted to and they locked him up for 7 years. And when it came back out that, hey, the office had done this and he was getting let out of jail, Kamala Harris fought to keep him in jail. The evidence was so overwhelming that the guy won $10 million. But still, that just tells you it's not a personality thing. It's the job. You might have a nice executioner, but there's still an executioner. And, that's what goes on. Anyway, I was involved in that argument. I was also involved. That's my whole point, is that I'll be sitting there like refreshing instead of writing, right? And then maybe also some frustration around, we have no transparency over how these social media algorithms work, right? And like a year ago, I had 40,000 followers. Now I have 140,000 followers. But after I started tweeting about Venezuela and stuff like that, all of a sudden I had less engagement. And I'm not talking, obviously if people disagree with me, they've never held back from disagreeing with me on Twitter. So if people disagree with me, I'd have, if it was just that, I'd have engagement around that. But I have less engagement now than when I had 100,000 less followers. And I don't think it's anything conspiratorially against me, but I think that along with this whole idea that, social media is cracking down on fake news, that what they've done is say, if you post something from this, from Venezuela analysis or from anything else that's outside of these particular news agencies, now we've flagged you. Now we're not going to let a lot of people see what you're saying. Or if you say something with this sort of view, and it doesn't have, it's on automatic. It doesn't have to be against this person or that person. And I mean, the dude Jack came out and said they made a mistake making it be about people getting a follower count and getting people behind them, that he wants it to now just be about subjects, and that you follow subjects. You won't get, even though you've chosen to follow someone, you won't get that, you'll just get subjects. So what that means is that you're following Twitter as opposed to following people putting out ideas, because I think that, even though they sold us social media on this whole democracy of media, that is something that they're trying to take back now. They're trying to pull back on that. And with that whole idea that, okay, if you're interested in this, we're going to feed you things talking about this thing, and you're not going to get to listen to who you... So anyway, my frustration was like, fuck, I'm spending too much time on this stuff, and it's not really getting to anybody. And I did some tests, because then I just started tweeting about silly shit just to see, or entertainment stuff just to see like who was following. And everybody that was liking it now, even though for a couple days I just tweeted about entertainment stuff, and like everybody that was engaging with it were people with like black flags or red flags or whatever. And so it was clear that it was now just shaping, and whereas I should say a few months before, it was some people only knew me as the director of that movie, or some people knew me from music or whatever. And so now it really got narrowed down. And yeah, when I said that stuff on Twitter, people were like, oh, he has a tinfoil hat on or whatever. But I mean, they do say it's an algorithm, and they do say that they lead people towards what they think they're interested in. And so that means there's some editorial aspect going on. So anyway, yeah, no, I just, I got a lot of work to do. And one reason that I get stuff done is because I'm able to be obsessive, right? Like, you could choose things that you obsess on, but then that like has something blinking, like, oh, somebody said something. You're like refreshing and checking stuff out, and it's just, yeah, it's bullshit. But so yeah, I didn't know what a twink was, but I found out.
So, in between questions, can you keep your hands up so that we can get to the next person? I'm going to give the mic to you.
Hi, I'm glad that I now have a conspiracy about why people don't like my Facebook statuses. But I'm just coming off the pickets for the Shop and Stop workers strike. I am not a Shop and Stop worker. I want to clarify that. But what I will say is that it's been really inspiring to sort of see overnight the workers being able to turn away food trucks and like sort of the intense solidarity from the community that's really sort of pushed their strike on. So my question is, it sort of seems like we're in a moment, like sort of a really pivotal moment where we're seeing sort of like unprecedented strikes for the first time and sort of movements in labor. And I'm just curious, sort of in your viewpoint, if you have any thoughts on sort of this upswing, and also what key sectors we should be sort of orienting towards for organizing.
Well, I think that my thoughts are, it's beautiful that there's this upsurge, and we have to make sure that we're tying it together with a radical vision of what we want beyond this. Because, we don't just want this one struggle. We don't want just something that can keep adjusting with every pay cut and doing that. We want to build a movement that changes the way things are structured. Hopefully, I think that everybody wants that. Like I said, there's questions about how to get there, but I think that we have to keep that radical vision involved, because I think that also gives people confidence about what the struggle is about, right? We've had many years of very careerist union leaders, right, where it's like, I want to keep my job as the union leader and not breaking certain laws because it's, they have a career. Well, I think it's really the time for radicals to get involved in this kind of movement making, because, if people are going to jail for breaking windows, they can go to jail for doing a solidarity strike, for leading that, but I think that's the point, is that we have to make sure it maintains a radical vision, and somehow that people are connecting. I have no idea, because I don't even, know about this particular strike. But I don't know if there's any connection. How many people didn't know about this strike? Okay, so I'm, but
A local supermarket chain.
okay, so yeah, I don't know about Boston supermarkets, but still, we should know about that. happening. You know, like that would be something that would help, because that same struggle is going to come up in the Bay Area. And it's always a problem finding out about, you know, like if it was, you know, two people getting involved in a fist fight, it's likely to show up on the local news all over the country, right? But something like that, you know, it's very, you know, it's contained in the media. So sharing that information, but I also don't know, has there been any interaction between between, for instance, the Graduate Student Union here and that strike? Those sorts of things are ones that build both, you know, happening. You know, there's somebody here from the Nurses Union, and I'm sure all of these interactions, you know, help it grow. But like keeping the radical vision that this can, we can make these things not only be about the normal union issues and the normal issues. Those are very important. I don't want to say that, but I think people feel more empowered when they're like, hey, we can, you know, we can affect the way the world is. We can affect the way other things are happening, you know. So, yeah.
So I just want to make a short announcement. On Sunday, Harvard Grad Students Union is teaming up with the Student Labor Action Movement and also the Tufts Labor Group to go to the picket lines in Somerville. So we're meeting at the Harvard T Station at 2 p.m. Come out. This will be the second or third time we'll be visiting the picket line, so come out. You're all.
And I want to make clear, I said a statement like, you know, career union leaders. Like, yeah, people should have a career doing that. But I just meant like there's this, you know, I'm just delineating that from the idea that it should be led with lofty ideals. There should be some practicality to it. Like, how do you win this? What can we win? How can we do it? But there should also be a radical push that this is the motor by which we can create a radical militant movement. And by militant, that means just being hard. Doesn't mean, like for some folks, it doesn't mean you've got AKs or whatever. But, you know, like stopping scabs and making sure that it's not just an informational picket about your strike. When we can build a radical militant movement that changes people's material conditions in their neighborhoods and also changes other social conditions that aren't often considered connected to labor.
Hi, thanks for coming out and talking to us. It was a really great presentation. I just had a question kind of about Sorry to Bother You in particular and about revolutionary artwork. So a few comrades of mine were involved ending kind of last summer in an organizing struggle at a call center. And like literally every single thing shown in the movie happened in the call center. Like not the horse people stuff, but everything up to that point. I mean, just like corporate fascist kind of positivity, management bullshit, and like blatant sexual harassment and racism. One of the supervisors said that slavery was a good thing for black people, and then when that was reported, the management, HR kind of goons said that it was just a big misunderstanding, you don't have the right sense of humor. So, but the movie actually was really resonated with a lot of people who worked there, who saw it, and could see their struggles reflected in a movie instead of like, you know, superhero bullshit or a rom-com about rich people or whatever we normally get in movies. But anyway, that's a lot of things. But my question is just like, for you as an artist who's making revolutionary artwork that shows people's struggles, like how can we, or I guess I'm curious about your thoughts about the importance of that and how to get revolutionary ideas and revolutionary criticism of our current society out among the working class where it really needs to be.
Well, yeah, I think it's important to, I mean, I've spent a lot of my life doing that. So, but I think that what makes it important, more important and effective is being connected to campaigns that are going on so that the art that is created has some connection to what the actual questions are that people are asking and that need to be answered for those movements to grow. Because otherwise, artists start seeing themselves as kind of like this person with a better view of the world than everyone else. And they're going to show you how to do it. But often then those things like miss the mark completely. Like even when they're done with, a great heart, great intention. There's this book called 9.5 Theses on Art in Class by art critic Ben Davis, yeah. And he has this example in there about like how in the early 2000s there was this big installation piece by a well-known artist somewhere in New York, and the whole idea behind it was, he wanted to make his intention was he wanted to make an anti-war piece. So he made something where you had to walk through kind of a battlefield of exploded bodies, and his intention was, look, I feel like if people see how horrible war is, then they'll be against the war. But anti-war organizers understood that everybody already knows how horrible war is, and that the real question that most people were asking is, what can we do about it? And so, an art, just like an academic has to be involved with whatever the movement is they're saying that they're talking about, like can't just be somewhere reading articles about it. Similarly, with artists, we take in information, take in media, and we're not doing it in a concerted way. We're just looking at what we think the world is based on, everything else everyone else is getting. And if we're not involved in the actual campaigns, we ask the wrong questions and answer the wrong questions with our art. And so I think that for it to be revolutionary art, for it to be effective, I would say, artists need to be involved in movements. So, yeah.
Hello. Hi. Earlier you mentioned that culture is defined by the way we survive. I just really like that. And my question is, like, even earlier you were referencing that we're like crabs in a bucket and like trying to get out of this bucket, but the bucket itself is an intentional institution, and even if you get out of the bucket, you are still in like this farce of an institution. So my question to you is, like, how do we reimagine or even create a world outside of white supremacy culture?
I think that like I said, since culture is grown out of the way that we survive, which means the way that things are economically set up, how do we do that? So I think that we need a world in which the people democratically control the wealth that we create with our labor, right? That's the beginning of it. That doesn't solve it right there. But when we have access to the power that we create, then we have the power to start changing that culture. Right now, that culture supports the system that exists right now. So we need to be involved in a struggle that changes that. I mean, there's, somebody that sits here and tells you a concise answer to that question is full of shit. But the point is that we need that we got to get to the underlying thing. And yeah, I think that's it.
Hello. So I'm going to read these questions because it gets kind of personal and it's pretty long, so I wanted to be precise. Recently, as you mentioned, you've been talking a lot about Venezuela in the media, and on February 23rd at the Independent Spirit Awards, you said that the CIA was planning a coup in Venezuela, completely disregarding the Venezuelan people's efforts to free themselves from a dictatorship, as well as over 50 countries who have recognized Juan Guaidó as the legitimate interim president of Venezuela, including socialist Albania and Spain. And before you think that because I am white, I'm part of the elites of Venezuelans who came to the US enjoying privilege, I will tell you that I'm actually the daughter of a Cuban woman who escaped communism in Cuba and a Venezuelan man who lost his job because of Chavez's corrupt government. So I came to the US 5 years ago. I came with my mom, who works at a bakery and earns less than Florida's minimum wage, which is already pretty bad, $5.46. My dad was able to come later, but had to live in the shadows for a year after he overstayed his visa. And he's diabetic, so we were already struggling to find his medication. They're both older and don't know English. So while I was going full-time to community college, I had had 2 jobs to sustain my home. So now, do you really think we would be going through all of this if Venezuela was as good as you like to paint it on Twitter and the media? And why do you support a dictator who has committed and keeps committing violations of human rights every day?
Okay, so first, you said 50 countries support Guaido. How many countries are there in the world? There's 140 countries that don't support Guaido. So let's not do the spin right there. Separately, your question is, I don't really, you said, why would you be here? Your question is, why would you be here if Venezuela was as great as it? Put it like this, but I'm not gonna, Venezuela has problems. The question is, what do those problems come from? Now, one thing is this. There's a lot of lies about how much support Guaido has. A lot of lies. Now let me say this. If there was really as much support as the New York Times says that they have, if really 80% of the country was in support of Guaido and the opposition, they could just have a general strike for 2 days. It'd be all over with. But they don't have the working class. The opposition does not have the working class. And then, look, if you even just look at the numbers, okay, I did listen to you, but if you look at if you just look at the numbers, first of all, and this is just talking about numbers, this isn't even talking about ideas. If you look at the numbers, there are just in there are colectivos which are demonized in the media, but many of them are just, groups of folks that are working around different. Some of them are armed, and luckily some of them are armed, but there's millions of people in colectivos, millions of people. It's a 30 million people population there. Millions of people are in colectivos. Then you have 300,000 people in the army, and then you have, this is just talking about this fighting thing. Then you have another 1.5 to 2 million people that are in the all-volunteer Bolivian militia. You can't have those people at that level of support and not have them have family members, cousins, all of that are also somewhere around that, in that small of a population. These are just, I'm just talking about just using some of the statistics that we get from just regular newspapers like New York Times and things like that, just to show that it's nowhere near that overwhelming support for Guaido. That's why things aren't happening. That's why they're trying to get the military to turn on him, because they can't get the people. They can't get the people. They would do a strike if they were going to do that. They don't have the working class. Now, here's the thing. On that, the Human Development Index in Venezuela has gone up every year until the last thing, which was 2017. Gone up every year, talking about infant mortality rates, meaning got better, and other standard of living measurements. Things are terrible right now for certain reasons. Since 2017, there have been real sanctions that have. It's a lot. Wait, how many people know there's been sanctions since 2017? The rest of you don't know there's been sanctions, or you just don't agree? No, you're talking about before that. I'm talking about since 2017. And before that, and all the numbers are, no, that's not true. So here's the thing. Okay, so then why are you talking to me then? Why are you talking to me then? Look, the point is, all you're here to say is I'm wrong about Venezuela. Point taken, whatever. He's not a dictator. He was voted in on every fucking Look, check this out. Okay.
Sorry, it's almost 9.
Okay, I'll just finish the point even though, look, ever since 1999, the opposition has been saying that the elections were rigged. There was no election that the opposition did not say was rigged except for the one that they won. All of a sudden, that was the one that wasn't rigged. Every election before that or after, they said was rigged. Now, they've got crazy media going on where some doctors said that they were in the room. Why would when some ballot boxes were being stuffed? It makes no fucking sense that a doctor would be in the room. That'd be like if we sent doctors to some other country and they let them be in the room where election results were being handled. It just makes no sense. But the media, that's part of the frustration, is that the media will put this out there. So yeah. Anyway,
I'm turning the mic over to our last official question, and if the speaker has a little bit more time, we'll potentially take a few more.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I represent 750 workers here on campus, the dining hall workers.
Yes.
And we cooks and dishwashers had our health insurance taken away. We went on strike for 3 weeks.
Yes.
We shut this place down. Harvard came begging for us to come back. What do you think 4,000 grad student workers have their potential over just 700 dishwashers?
Oh, if the 4,000 grad students walked out and had a real strike, they would be shaking in their boots. There would be, the amount of wealth that you all create through the work that you do, and the amount of projects that would be stopped would be something that they wouldn't even want that to register. So, I mean, again, I wouldn't want to count chickens before they're hatched, but they're gonna do a similar thing that they did with y'all, and that was that. From what I get, you were just asking for $35,000 a year, right? And we got a lot more. Yeah. So, I mean, somebody, was it you, said they kept coming down and checking whether there was a walkout happen. They're scared of y'all.
Oh, yeah.
And they're scared of y'all. And if 4,000 walked out, they wouldn't know what to do with themselves. I hope you show them where your power is at. I mean, the best thing would be if they were scared beforehand and were like, oh, we don't want. That's not going to happen. You're going to have to probably show them what you're willing to do. And and what a better time than now to do it, right? This is the part where you're here exploring what life is about and trying to, some people may just be here because you're trying to better your, career opportunity, but some are also combining that with, finding out about the world, finding out about life. This is where you do that. This is where you make the stories that you tell to your kids and your grandkids about what you did when you were a graduate student at Harvard and how that affected not only your life here, but the rest of the world. So, thank you.
So just to wrap things up, I just want to share one moment in the film that really resonated with me when we're seeing the telemarketer strike on the TV, And we hear that the telemarketers are there, some other phone company workers are there, and the university students are there. So they're just like the radicals participating, like in the strike. And what we've built here is that we've built something more than that. We have organized ourselves, and on May Day, May 1st, we're gonna have an all-day picket in the Harvard Yard, and I trust that all of you will be there walking a picket line with us because
And I heard someone was saying that some students are worried about what the professors they work for will think, whatever. They'll understand. They're not gonna, And that's the good thing about it being collective is it's not just personal. Like, some of them may be cool people. Some of them may be cool people that are like, oh, we got to get this work done, all that. But you're working with a collective, and they'll understand what's going on. So.
Yeah. Gerald, anything to add?
Just thank you all for coming out. Just on behalf of the Du Bois Graduate Society, I'll just make a quick plug. If you want to find out about other things that we do, you can follow us on Facebook. It's facebook.com/Du Bois, DUBOIS Society. The work that we're doing, it takes a lot of courage. It's exhausting. So what we try to do as an organization is to put on events that looks at mental health. How do you really deal with that piece as you do some of this work? So please go to our website, find out about that and the other events that we do. I also want to acknowledge, I see maybe one or two people from Du Bois that are in the audience. If you can raise your hand. Thank you, Colette. So I want to give my colleagues on stage and in the audience a round of applause. This work wouldn't be possible without you all. And I'll turn it over to our panelists if they want to say any final words.
Inspired.
Anyway, I just want to, again, thank you guys for coming out here, and I hope that you also take, what Boots Riley has shared about, thinking about how your own experience can tie into collective action, and think about, ways in which you have power and in which you can exercise that power. And, if you want to work through the Harvard Graduate Student Union, that's awesome. If you want to find other ways to do it, that's great too. But just make sure that you think about some concrete things you can do. So it's not just learning, but also putting things into action.
And come out to the picket line on Sunday. Thank you.
And come to the May Day thing.
You're really at a historical juncture right here. And it's not, you're here studying history, but you're also here to make history. So hopefully you do it.
Thank you, Boots. Thank you.